Well, hello everybody. Welcome to this first Labour Future podcast. We have decided that we're in lockdown. It's going to be going on for a long, long time. We've got nothing better to do, so we thought we would start a podcast. My name is Brendan Chilton. I'm the director of Labour Future, and my co-producer, whatever you want to call it, editor, producer, is Jervis of the English Labour Network, and he also co-authored with Stephen Kinnock the book Purpose of Labour, Spirit of Britain.
Close, Brendan.
You should read it.
Spirit of Britain, Purpose of Labour. But I'll let you off on that.
Blimey, I wrote it down wrong. Well, we told you it was going to be rough. We told you it was going to be ready. We haven't lied. So listen to Joe, not me, because I haven't got these on. So we're launching this today. As I say, it's going to be a bit rough. We're going to do our level best to bring you all the latest Labour news, information and analysis on our policies and on Sir Keir Starmer's performance and other key people in the shadow cabinet. Joe, for the benefit of our listeners, and I've already messed up, where are you in the UK right now?
Well, first of all, hello, Brendan. It's a great idea to a podcast. Very happy to be part of it. And hello to everyone at home. I am in Hornchurch. I don't know why I needed to look out the window to say that. I've been here for the last 7 weeks. And yeah, you heard about, not knowing what day of the week it is. Apparently, I don't even know where I am. Yeah. It's I'm out and it's quite sunny today. It's all right. It's not too bad. It's quite quiet at the moment, as you might expect. You're down in Kent, I guess, are you?
I am. I'm down in deepest, darkest blue Tory Kent, but under the leadership of Sir Keir Starmer, we're going to turn it red as time goes on.
I'm right on the edge. If I go one way, I get red. If I go the other way out into Essex, I get blue.
For now,
so I'm right on the. So we want to. Everything to my right needs to go red, and everything
absolutely
needs to stay red.
So Joe,
yeah, interesting part of the world.
We need to tell the people what are our plans for this podcast. What are we going to try and achieve? How are we going to run it? Because I think there's not a lot of Labour podcasts around right now, are there?
No, but I think that was part of the thinking. Obviously, we've realised that we're going to be in lockdown for a while longer, albeit the ability to see the odd person here and there, if you can make head and tail of the government's new rules.
Go out, but don't go out. Go to work only if you can't go out. And if you do go to work, stay safe. Don't use public transport. Yeah,
clear as mud. Yeah, perfect. I think we just thought, why not do this? Like you say, there's not any other Labour podcasts really around at the moment, as far as we can see. There's plenty of podcasts about the left more generally, but not so much about Labour. So I think, obviously it's in many ways a very tragic time, but also a time when there's lots to talk about, extraordinary times. And I suppose we can have a good discussion about the new normal and how, if there is such, if we can call it that, and how Labour responds to the pandemic, how Labour looks to shape the post-pandemic recovery, Keir Starmer's leadership. There's quite a lot to talk about. So I think, it's a good time to start this and get this going.
Well, we've just had today, this will probably come out later in the day, but today we've had Prime Minister's questions. And I have to say, once again, I'll put my hands up. I didn't vote for Sir Keir Starmer. I voted for Lisa Nandy. But boy, what a performance. Analytical, inquisitive, incisive, challenging. He's standing there in the House of Commons. He looks like a Prime Minister in waiting. And he's only been leader of the Labour Party for 4 weeks?
Something like that. It's a lawyer versus a showman, isn't it, really? It's the forensic approach. It's the smart, intelligent approach. But also, I think what's been impressive with Keir is that he's been very constructive. He wants us to get through this just like everyone else. His approach to coronavirus has been, I think, absolutely on the money so far. He's critiqued when it's useful to critique, and when the government can improve what they're doing, obviously testing PPE and so on, care homes. He's really forensically looked at this stuff, but he's not been obstructive. He's been constructive, and I think if he can apply that approach throughout this crisis and beyond, I think he'll do very well. Those are my thoughts on his performance so far. But obviously, there's a big job to be done by him and by Labour generally, which is about rebuilding trust.
Well, there was this poll a few weeks ago, wasn't there? I think it was by YouGov. Have you got the poll link there, Joe? What we'll do is we'll share
hopefully we can get it up on the screen as well. But the the polling says, I mean, this was done, I think, on the 11th or 13th of April. So this was right at the beginning of Keir's reign, if you like. So he obviously it shows the work that he had to do when he came in. And if you talk about which party's in touch with the general public, I mean, you got polling, so 17% of people say Labour, 36 Tory. That's in touch with ordinary people. And then there's this question about trustworthiness, and that's 19% Labour, 32% for the Tories. So that, I mean, I think that tells you a lot about the challenge we've got, and that's not just out of one thing. That's down. I'm sure we recognise that the Corbyn era didn't go well, but we also recognise that Labour's Brexit position in 2019 wasn't particularly useful in terms of some of the seats we needed to win and all those seats we lost. So I think that issue of trust, I mean, you compare that to Johnson. Johnson is someone who's basically lied to everybody he's ever met, the Queen, politicians, partners, but on the biggest issue of the day of Brexit, he was trusted and he has been seen to deliver, although we know there's a long way to go with trade talk, etc. He has been seen to deliver, and because of that, I think he's been trusted on coronavirus. So I think there's an issue of trust there, and it's a long uphill road, but I think Keir's doing a very good job at the moment.
But since that poll, I mean, that poll is available on YouGov, and we'd encourage everyone to go and look at it. But I think one of the key things that's happened, obviously, since then is YouGov, I think it was yesterday, released a poll that showed Sir Keir Starmer's personal approval ratings, I think, are at net plus 23, which is above Boris Johnson. So in terms of rebuilding that trust and the connectivity with the British public, particularly in those red wall seats going from Wales right the way across to the east coast of England up to the northwest and also around the coast as well. And of course, we'll talk about Scotland at some point too. He's starting well if he's got those approval ratings up already. Yeah.
He's, to be ahead of Boris is pretty spectacular. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from Keir, who I think, like I say, has done almost everything right so far. Obviously, I think there was a problem for Boris at the weekend. I think up until the weekend and that change of message, he was very much trusted. Obviously, there were growing questions around the number of deaths here compared to other countries in the world. Obviously, we're not doing well on that front. It's pretty poor. But he was kind. I think there might have been a point of the weekend with that stay alert messaging, and I was getting a sense of people who had previously been supportive of Boris, who were just looking at and going, hang on, they lost the plot a bit here. So I think it's a combination of Keir's very strong start and maybe Boris on that issue, on the messaging issue, slightly falling away a little bit. But yeah, I think that just proves a point, that polling, that, as we said, it's been a good start from Keir Starmer.
And I think obviously the big issue right now is coronavirus, COVID-19. And it's just extraordinary how the party that came up with, well, it wasn't the party, but the Vote Leave campaign was predominantly led by the Conservatives. Vote Leave, take control. Then in Boris's campaign, get Brexit done. And then most recently, stay at home. Now, stay alert. I mean, what is this little virus going to jump up out of a bush and scare us or something? How do you stay alert? What does it mean? Nobody's got a clue.
Exactly. It's to think that that's come from the same group of people that produced those two very effective Brexit messages and have produced the stay-at-home message. I think they've kind of gained a reputation for being very good at this stuff, and this has been perhaps their first big error, if you like. But then you've got to look at the wider context. I mean, there's a little part of me that wonders if this is deliberate, and they want to, the government want to confuse people a little bit. They want some people going back to work. They want the economy to get started, again, but they don't want to be held responsible if things go wrong on the health front. So I think there's a few games going on there in terms of the messaging. But yeah, I think the public perception has shifted a little bit.
I'd be interested, Joe, in your view on how Labour have handled this, because obviously right now in some ways, all power to Keir. I mean, he's come in. We had the coronavirus get to Britain smack bang in the middle of the very long Labour leadership contest, which seems like a lifetime away now, but, we all remember it dragged on a bit. So the Labour leadership contest was kind of derailed. He's then come in and he's leading, let's be honest, I don't say this in a derogatory sense, the parliamentary party in terms of numbers is a rump. It's a very small parliamentary party. He's got to manage that, bring the party together. Oh, and by the way, give a compelling, comprehensive and confident response to an international pandemic. In terms of his handling of Labour's position, I know he's faced some criticism for not being too rigorous against the government, but I personally think he's got the tone just right. I mean, obviously in a crisis, people want bipartisanship. They want people to come together. And he's done that quite well, I think.
People want, the country wants politicians to come together. The politicians want I think a lot of politicians want the country to come together. And obviously that's something that's not happened over the last few years with Brexit. And I think you hear the messaging from Johnson around bringing people together. He's clued into that, but so is Keir. Keir recognises we need this constructive engagement, and getting the balance right. I think the idea of critiquing where it's useful and we can improve the situation, and there'll be a time to look back and say what the hell happened in March. Why are we so slow? There'll be time to do that. But in the current situation, looking at what can be done differently now. I think that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, one of the things, with my kind of English Labour network hat on, that we probably should be criticising is the complete confusion around devolution and the different approaches from the different nations, and the refusal. Boris didn't even mention in his speech on Sunday that it was for England only, and that's going to cause an awful lot of problems. Yet people going out in Scotland saying, "Well, hang on, the UK Prime Minister said we could do this," but actually it was an England only thing. So having that clear messaging around what's for England and what's for Scotland, what's for Wales, that's a very, and Northern Ireland, that's a very, a classic kind of example where Keir could perhaps, and he has, fair play to him, he's pointed that out.
Well, Joe, I think one of the things that this coronavirus has shown is obviously, the different responses to the different nations of the UK. I think in our series that we're going to run with this, if people haven't turned off already, I do think we need to discuss Labour's approach to devolution and Labour's approach to the constitutional settlement of the UK. That could perhaps feature in one of our future episodes.
Absolutely.
But I'm going to move, because I know we have a time limit. We've got a schedule down written here. We've totally ignored it so far. I'm going to move us on to the economic news. Obviously, coronavirus is going to have a massive impact on the economy. We've seen the news today that in the first quarter of this year, when Britain was really just sort of easing into having coronavirus, the economy shrunk by 2% in the first quarter. The government then instigated the furlough measures and the support for businesses. We're expecting a much bigger drop in this quarter that we're in now. What's Labour's message here? How can Labour, because I think, let's be fair to the government, Rishi Sunak, I think in the first instance has done the right thing in supporting businesses. But what's Labour's offer going to be, and what's our vision of recovery? This is going to be a major issue as we go through the course of the next 6 months, I think.
Sure. Yeah, I think obviously I think we're right to give credit to Sunak for extending the measures. It's a massive question for how Labour approaches the post-pandemic recovery. Obviously, we all want to see a new economy, I think, on the left, which is fairer, respects we've seen the incredible work that key workers have been doing, and we've seen who those key workers are, and we need to have a newfound respect for those people and public services and so on. So I think we need to shape that, but we need to learn the lessons, I think, of what happened after the 2008 crash, where we kind of assumed, because we wanted it to be the case, that the public backlash would be against casino capitalism, but actually I think it was more than that. It was a backlash against, I personally think, a increasingly metropolitan Britain run by and for graduates, and I think that was the trend. And we saw the economic fallout was 2008. The political fallout of that was Brexit, and it was a lot of that kind of anger towards the big, London and the kind of graduate class, I think, came with Brexit for one reason or another. and the economy, which had shifted from being 30% manufacturing to 10% manufacturing in 20 years, and all the kind of good jobs had moved away to London and the big cities. And there was a big thing going on there, which I don't think we read, a big trend that we just never quite got to grips with. And that cost us, I think that cost us probably 4 elections ultimately. Obviously, there's all the other stuff that came with it, Brexit, Corbyn leadership, so on. But I think not reading that decade has really cost us. I think if we fail to read the fallout from the coronavirus crisis, then we're going to make the same mistakes again. If we just say, oh, the coronavirus crisis means everybody's suddenly going to want to splash an extra 5% of income tax on public services, or whatever else. If we read it in the way we want to read it, then that's going to be a problem. And on that account, it's also a problem in terms of our view of the world and our internationalism. If we view this as suddenly people are going to realise just like that we need to, international cooperation. I think that is a good thing. But it's an argument we need to win. We need to win the argument for international cooperation, not let that lead out into kind of the globalised open borders world of pre-2016, which was very unpopular and it's probably even more unpopular now. But I mean, Brendan, you've obviously we were on different sides on the Brexit debate. And you, as someone who backed Leave and is very well connected to those voters, I mean, you might have a different perspective on all of this stuff, reading the crash, reading the recovery, and how we need to go about it.
I think, Joe, and this is going to come into our discussion, I think, on devolution, because I think the Brexit vote was just as big a rejection of that London studenty, graduatey, cosmopolitan class as it was of Brussels. And I think as we go through this, we should delve into some of those specific issues. They're too big to deal with in this little segment just today. I think looking at what's going to happen with the recovery, you obviously had, before the COVID crisis, the Conservative government were moving towards becoming a bigger spending, bigger investment in the region's government. Now, whether that's going to be affordable after this is another matter. So Labour is going to have to navigate here a very delicate path of being more orientated towards creating that new economy, but within the fiscal constraints that are inevitably going to exist. We've obviously got our new Shadow Chancellor, Annalise Dodds, who I think, brilliant appointment, by the way. I think her performance has been really good since she took over.
Absolutely.
And Bridget Phillipson as Shadow Chief Secretary. And again, already they're a demonstration that Labour is going to focus on economic credibility. So the challenge, which I think we're going to explore over the few weeks in this series, is how we build that new country, that new economy. But at the same time, the reality is that we've got choices. We're going to have to cut in some areas. We're going to have to raise taxes in other areas. We're going to have to perhaps limit our aspirations for, regenerating those former industrial areas. And that will have political consequences, because those areas that voted Leave, that rejected the party's official stance in the referendum, are looking for a reason to come back to us, because they're Labour at heart. They want to come back to us. But if we can't offer that investment and that regeneration because of the restraints, if we're still seen, I think, as a party too wedded to the idea of being in the European Union, that will also be a hindrance. Although I would say Sir Keir Starmer did a good job, I think it was yesterday on LBC, when he was interviewed by Nick Ferrari. And he was asked, will you be calling for an extension to the transition? And he just said, no, not at this stage. It's too early to determine that. So although I think naturally he is instinctively more of an internationalist and if you like, more of a globalist perhaps. I mean, there's nothing wrong with internationalism. I'm an internationalist. But that more sort of orientation towards globalism, I think he sees, he wants to be Prime Minister. He wants to get Labour into power. The only way we're going to do that is by winning back those red wall seats. And that means we're going to have to face as a party some difficult questions around our identity and our beliefs and what we should be focusing on. Instead of focusing on issues that might be sort of social fringe issues or sort of liberation issues, we need to focus on economic issues, the jobs, the building communities.
Absolutely.
And if we do that, we'll win.
Yeah, if we want to build a more fair and tolerant society, we have to get elected first. And
exactly.
we have to, and the way you get elected is by talking about whole nation, largely economic issues, and building a national story around that and where we want to go. And obviously being credible on on economics is part of that, and being trusted generally is a big part of that as well. So I think I think that's absolutely right. I think there's a big question around. I think we need to read the country and how it's kind of thinking, but we also need to lead the country. So winning this argument, I mean, if you look at the Attlee government, I mean, they were in a similar position in terms of the economics, in terms of having
no money.
In terms of obviously very different situations in many ways, but in coming out of a crisis and not having much money to play with, but they still built a new Britain. They won the argument for that. And in 2008, Labour lost the argument about where we need to go after the crash. And now this next big event, coronavirus, we need to win the argument again. And winning that argument, we've got to be clever about it. We've got to read the situation, how people feel. People are not going to, if they sense that we're just going to come in and just splash money, and just because that's an ideological thing, then I don't think they're going to support that idea. But if we show that we're going to invest in those red wall seats, and but across the country in terms of industrial areas, if we show that we're going to invest in those areas because there is an economic incentive to grow the economy, and we have a choice around how we grow the economy, we grow it in a whole nation approach, we grow it in a green way, sustainable way. If we can win the argument that we need to grow the economy to get us out of this mess, and that's the way forward, not shrinking it through more austerity, then that's an argument that needs to be won. But it does, we do need to go out there and win it, and we need to win it cleverly. We can't just like I said, we can't just say, we need
splash the cash.
We can't make it look, splash. We can't just splash money and make it look like it's ideological and it's the left being the left and so on, because there's a genuine economic case for investing in those areas, even after coronavirus, creating those jobs, developing that new economy, sustainable economy. So I think that's the route to go down. And the same on the internationalist front, as you mentioned, in terms of we need to be a country that cooperates globally. We need to show that we are confident, post Brexit, that despite not being part of the EU, we still have a lot of clout in the world. And in terms of, people listen to us and take notice, and building those new alliances, showing that the way we tackle pandemics, terrorism, climate change is through cooperation. I think that's an argument that needs to be won. But like I say, if it slips back into pro-EU, open borders, that kind of language, then people are that's going to scare them even more, kind of away from us. So I think, and you point, sorry to go on a bit, but I think you pointed out an important thing around Keir's approach on the EU, which I think is a sensible approach. It's a strategic approach, and he recognises the way the country voted in 2016, and again in the election in 2019, the message that we got from the seats that we need to win. I think the approach to trade negotiations and immigration, those are big questions as well for the party in terms of winning back trust and reconnecting culturally with those areas.
And all this, of course, is going to be done in a world that is going to be transformed. Certainly, there was a conference once called A World Transformed. We're going through it now. So all that's going to be happening then. And of course, we've touched there in that segment, Joe, on issues to do with trade, immigration, the economy, the identity, the constitution of the UK. There's some big issues there that we're going to have to deal with as we go over. And of course, because this podcast is going to become so popular, it's going to become the number one podcast in podcast land, wherever they store these things. We'll hopefully get some people on. I mean, just moving towards our wrap up now. I mean, our plans are, Joe, I think we should spell it out to what we want to do. We're going to try and do this on a weekly basis to start with. We're going to try and get some guests on. We're conscious that we are both white bearded men. And so we want to diversify this podcast. And so we're going to try and get some particularly women on, because there's huge issues at the moment going on in the House of Commons, particularly around the domestic violence bill. We've got some great women MPs doing a really good job on that. I think we need to get someone on from the BAME community, particularly as we're going to be probably discussing COVID for a long time, the impact this is having on those communities. I mean, it's terrible, the reports we're reading, that far more Black, Asian and Indian people are dying of COVID-19 than white people. And I think, well, something's clearly wrong there. We've got to find out what's going on. We also are going to be discussing the constitutional settlement. So, Joe, we hope people will be commenting, and if people have got ideas, they should chip in, shouldn't they, really?
Absolutely, yeah. Comment on this. Hopefully we'll get this out on Facebook, maybe a bit of it on Twitter as well. Yeah, share your thoughts. Any ideas for guests as well, share those ideas. Look forward to doing a few more of these.
No, definitely. And listen, I think as we wrap up here, we shouldn't use the word stay alert because no one's got a clue what it means. Our message to everyone is stay safe, wash your hands, stay at home.
Brilliant. I'll echo that. Good finish,
okay,
Brendan.
We'll see you next week and hope you've enjoyed it.
See you next week. Cheers. Bye-bye.